Who is that? Who was that? And you've got a Courtney. 86. Whether you're here in person or whether you're here on live stream, we're glad to have you here on a beautiful morning. We're going to be discussing this morning. We talked about Cain and Abel last week out of Genesis, and this morning we're going to be discussing Abram and Lot and their situation. Not like Cain and Abel's situation, but it was a family dispute. So I'm going to ask Megan if she would begin by reading the Bible Meets Live.
Open almost any source of social media, news media, or traditional media, and you'll find a platform awash in conflict, debate, and one-upmanship, especially during an election year like this one. Civil discourse and listening seem to be lost. But in our personal relationships and families, we learn from Scripture that we're to be makers of peace. Often this requires sacrifice. It takes a Christ-like faith and charitable trust in God that He will work things out in His way and in His time.
So we're going to be talking about, if you're familiar with Abram and Lot or Abraham, whichever one you want to call him, and their situation. But I must first give you some details before you will understand. If you're not familiar with the situation of Abram and Lot, we got to understand where Abram's coming from. You know, Abram had been wandering a little while, and God had promised him all these things, and his faith had wavered on him. So what did Abram do? Abram took off from Israel and went to Egypt. We all know that he was married to Sarai, and he went there with Sarai and Lot, which Lot is his nephew. But in the grand scheme of things, basically he was his acting father. So we see here more of a Lot is his nephew, but technically he's more like a son than he is a nephew. Well, just to give you a scoop of what's going on here, where we pick up at, they're on the way back from Egypt. If you know the story, Abram's faith in God had wavered. He got tired of waiting on what God had promised him. So he decides he's going to take off from Israel and go into Egypt because he's tired of the promises and it's not come from what God has told him. So he goes into Egypt. What does he do? He doesn't want to get to Egypt and feel like that they're going to overtake him because Sarai is his wife. So what does he do? He tells Pharaoh that Sarai is his sister, which was an absolutely wrong decision, because guess what Pharaoh did? Pharaoh makes Sarai his wife, makes her his wife. So we all see how this is transitioning into a complete catastrophe. Well, at the end of the day, that did not work out. As we all know, to understand this lesson, Abram is favored by God. He has been promised that he is favored by God. So guess what happens to Pharaoh in Egypt when he takes Sarai as his wife? Pharaoh goes into a major, basically like I consider COVID. They go into just all sorts of trouble. And then Pharaoh finds out that Sarai was not Abram's sister, it was his wife. So he runs Abram, Lot, and Sarai out of Egypt. They've been exiled because you notice he didn't kill Abram for it, because he understood Abram was protected, and anything that was done against Abram, that God would completely destroy whoever did it. But so we see what's going on in Abram's life. He's been promised a lot of things and he's listened to God, but we all get to that point sometimes in our life that we make decisions that probably are not the best decisions, and we didn't really focus on what we were trying to do in making that decision, and it led down the wrong path. Well, this is what Abram has done. So we're at this part of the lesson to where Abram, Lot, and Sarai are coming back from Egypt. Now, what has happened since then? We're going to read the lesson, and you're going to see how wealthy Abram and Lot really are. Well, they've gone to Egypt, and they have made tons of money. Sarai obviously was the sister of the Pharaoh, so now they have become really wealthy. So they're coming back into Israel with all this money, all these animals, all the herds, everything you can think of, and we're going to see what actually happens. And I'll ask Andrew if he would read the first few verses.
Now Lot, who was traveling with Abram, also had flocks, herds, and tents. But the land was unable to support them as long as they stayed together, for they had so many possessions that they could not stay together, and there were quarreling between the herdsmen of Abram's livestock and the herdsmen of Lot's livestock. At the time, the Canaanites and the Perizzites were living in the land. So Abram said to Lot, "Please, let's not have any quarreling between you and me, or between your herdsmen and my herdsmen, since we are relatives."
How many of us have heard of family disputes? Specifically, family disputes over land. Specifically, family disputes over money. Being in the insurance business, I see it quite often. And a lot of times it's maybe not where there was an agreement made, or maybe some of the times the person that was supposed to inherit something didn't get what they wanted, or they didn't inherit what they thought they were supposed to get. Well, where we're at in this lesson is we're going to see that Abram actually learned his lesson from what he did when going into Egypt. He learned his lesson in the understanding that he needs to wait on God's timing. You may ask why he didn't wait on it the first time. Well, he's in his 80s. He's been promised that he will have many, many, many people to follow, inherit his wealth. He doesn't have any children, and Sarai is barren. She can't have kids, so he kind of say he had a reason, but he kind of had a reason to doubt. I hate to say it that way, but we all doubt at sometimes in our life, and he had a doubt. Well, after doubting, he's back here now, and he's got all this stuff, and they're back in the land of Canaan, promised land, got everything, the biggest herds. Him and Lot's got the biggest herds, the biggest amount of people to manage them. I mean, they've got it. They've come back, and I guess you could say they've made it. But we're also going to begin to see this lesson likes to talk about the lesson that of Abram and how nice he was, which we'll learn in the next scripture of what he did. But the part of this lesson that I think the courtly fails to miss is Lot himself. Lot is not, he doesn't have anything. He shouldn't have anything, because Abram is technically his father, and technically he has all the assets. But as we can see here, there's already quarrels not between necessarily Abram and Lot, but between Lot back to Abram. He wants to get back to the land of Canaan, and I want what I can see. I want the very best. I can't operate with you. He's already forgot what they've already been through. And as they always say in Abram and Lot's situation, everybody thinks money will fix everything. Things will fix everything. And as the comedian always liked to say, more money, more problems. People think they get more money, they get more things, they get more assets. that the problems are going to be less. Unfortunately, 99% of the time, the problems become even more. Well, that's what Abram and Lot has ran into. Well, technically Lot, because Lot seems to be a little greedy. He seems to be unrespectful to Abram. And we all know how family things are. We all know how complicated they can be, especially when you're talking about a situation like this. And these conflicts can sometimes strain relationships not only for a year or two, but for generations to come. And I've seen it before where the family didn't even show up at the grandfather's funeral. Had that happen a couple years ago. Was wondering where the grandsons and the sons were, and they weren't even there. Over land. Why land won't given to them, or this and this is what technically Lot is causing a problem over. It's not Abram. He's understood what he's done wrong. And we also, in the world we live in, it's all about me. Well, we're going to learn here that Abram understands now it's not all about me. It's all about happiness. It's all about doing what's right. And a lot of times in these situations, is the battle actually worth what it's going to cost? Was in these situations we see this day and time, is the battle over a piece of land worth losing a lifetime of family, memories, relationships over a piece of land or an asset or anything like that? But the thing I want to focus on here today is not necessarily as much as what Abram did, but the short-sightedness and the things of Lot, the things that he missed out on and the things he couldn't see because he was too geared to the now, to what I'm going to get now, what I'm going to have now. He couldn't see down the road as to what, and pretty much he just didn't listen to what God had to tell him. So that's where we're at now. They've got everything. They've got everything they need for years to come. No, Abram doesn't have a kid yet. That's coming. But Lot is technically like his own child. And as I said earlier, Lot has come back to the land of Canaan. He wants his piece of the pie, and I want to get out. So we get to verse 9, and I'll ask Laura to read verses 9 through 11.
Isn't the whole land before you? Separate from me. If you go to the left, I will go to the right. If you go to the right, I will go to the left. Lot looked out and saw that the entire plain of the Jordan as far as Zoar was well watered everywhere like the Lord's garden in the land of Egypt. This was before the Lord destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah. So Lot chose the entire plain of the Jordan for himself. Then Lot journeyed eastward, and they separated from each other.
That's ironic in today's time. How easy does somebody, like, as I said, Abram learned his lesson from going to Egypt and not listening to God. He learned it was bad. He gets back to the land of Canaan and says, you know what, I need to listen to what God's telling me, because what I didn't go very well. I made the wrong decision, so I'm here now, and this is what God wants. And so he says he didn't have to do that. What does he say? He says, here's the land before us. If you go to the left, I'll go to the right. Well, what does the greedy Lot choose? He looks around and sees, I forgot how many miles wide it was. It's a strip of about 70 miles. And it's got plenty of water. You're talking about the land of milk and honey. And he says, I want all of it. And I'm sure that Abram's sitting there thinking, wow, he didn't just choose, he chose the land that's got everything. He's got anything and everything on it. And the thing you learn from Abram is he said he looked and Lot went his way and he went his. There was no argument from Abram. But the thing you got to understand here, the lesson that I get from it, is the short-sightedness of Lot. He looks at this land, and if you don't really understand, and I didn't until I'd done some research on it, you don't really understand what this land actually is. He looks out and sees for miles this beautiful land, and the grass is green, plenty of water, plenty of everything. And But he doesn't understand this, what it says here. You notice it puts in parentheses, this was before the Lord destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah. This land was so corrupt with people. It was so corrupt that you couldn't do anything there. They had worshiping goddesses and anything you could think of. Basically, I guess you could say Washington, D.C., the land of the corruption, because that's exactly what was going on. Everybody was out for everybody, and that's why the Lord ended up destroying it. But see, he didn't see this. Lot, all he seen was the physical part of it. And I think that's the lesson we can learn this morning is sometimes we forget everything. And as they always say, the sayings go, grass is always greener on the other side. Oh, the grass looked really green over there. But unfortunately why is grass usually greener? It's either over a septic tank or it's got crap under it. Well, he seen the green grass, but he didn't see the forefront of what was wrong with the land. So Lot ends up going down there, and without going all into his situation, he forgets the fact that this land is corrupt, and it leads to his destruction. We don't have enough time to go into his whole destruction, but we begin to see what Lot did. He was short-sighted. And in our world today, we want the now. We want what we can see. We don't want to trust God and what he's telling us is going to happen. And that's what led to the Lot's demise. So Lot ends up leaving the promised land and goes to hear that, and I was listening to a pastor talk about this very thing, and he said, we can't see, this was his statement, we can't see how did he put it? You can't see what you want to see. You must see what you need to see. And that really said a lot, because sometimes as human beings in our nature, we see what we want to see versus what we need to see. And that was what Lot's problem was. He seen that land. He already knew that that was a corrupt land. He already knew that it was going to be bad, but all he could see was the physical attributes. He couldn't see down into the actual function of that land and what it was going to do, and it ended up leading to his demise. But what did Abram do? He followed what God was telling him to do, and we'll find out in the next few verses what actually ended up happening. But you can tell that, as it says in verse 8, he chose the whole entire plain of Jordan for himself. How greedy can you be to not only do that to someone, but also do that to someone who has took care of you for your whole life? As I said earlier, he was his nephew, but he served as his father. So human nature always says, if it looks good, it feels good, must be good. Well, that's what Lot thought, and it ended up leading him, and that's unfortunate, because a lot of times that Lot is a lot like human nature, and it's a lot like our world today. We see what's on TV, we see what's happening on in our world, we see what's happening on in our environment or even in our community, and that's the first thing that we want to gravitate to. We learn from this here that is not the way to live your life. The one thing that I also noted that what research I said, you would have thought that anybody that had that thrown in front of him, as Abram did to Lot, you would have thought Lot would have looked to God and said, God, what is it that you want me to do? What is it which way would you want me to go? Which way would you have, which piece of land would you have me to have, or would you want me and Abram to farm together? Well, we notice he didn't think about God at all. He looked around and he said, I want that, which is what a lot of times we do in our own lives when we try to make decisions. We don't look to God for those answers that Lot didn't look for, and a lot of times it ends up leading to our own demise. While it might not be as big as Lot's demise, but it's a demise in any respect. And the one thing I will mention is kind of the symbolism that they use here in Genesis. You know, he says Zoar was well watered everywhere, like the Lord's garden in the land of Egypt. Well, we all know what happened in the Lord's garden. We had the fall of Adam and Eve. So that's why he's put that in there. We all know what happened in the land of Egypt. The Israelites was tortured. They were put into slavery. So those two symbolisms there pretty much lead us to understand that what's going to happen to Lot because of this decision that he's made. So we can understand that, and then as they put in parentheses, and eventually this land was destroyed into Sodom and Gomorrah's heir. So we can see where Lot has led, and that's the biggest lesson I learned this morning is our short-sightedness in the decisions we make in life. We need to look to God for some answers. We don't need to just run and jump the gun on everything that we do, even if it doesn't have anything to do with land. We need to consult with him so that we make the right decisions and we don't make the wrong ones like Lot did, the selfish ones that don't really make much sense. And as we move forward, we skip a few verses because there's just a little bit of knick-knack stuff going on in there. We skip to verse 14, and I'll ask Stephen if he would read those.
After Lot had separated from him, the Lord said to Abram, "Look from the place where you are, look north and south, east and west, for I will give you and your offspring forever all the land that you see. I will make your offspring like the dust of the earth, so that if anyone could count the dust of the earth, then your offspring could be counted. Get up and walk around the land, through its length and width, for I will give it to you." So Abram moved his tent and went to live near the oaks of Mamre at Hebron, where he built an altar to the Lord.
So now we see what Abraham's faith has led to. He stands there, gives Lot what he wants. This is all a plan by God. And by the faith that Abram showed God and his plan, you got to understand now, Abram at this point is in probably his early 80s, maybe mid 80s. He ain't got any children yet, no heirs. His wife can't have children. We also understand that that's not going to be a problem. And then what does he do here? He tells them that as far as you can see from the north, south, and east and west, this is going to be your land. This is going to be yours, and I'm going to give you offspring forever that you can't even imagine the offspring that you're going to have and how big your offspring will grow in the future. And so we see that this faith that Abram has had, we see what he's done. And you notice that Abram, yes, he had his moments when he went to Egypt, because he did doubt. And we all in our life have some doubts sometimes when things don't go our way and things go wrong and we wonder what the world's going on. And we should have questions at times, but God's there to answer them. And at this point, I'm sure Abram is thinking, I got to have faith. And he has had faith. He just turned away the beautifulest part of the land that he was going to be able to put his herds on for God to tell him, go walk around this land, length and width, and I'm going to give it all to you. I want you to go live near the oaks, and I didn't have time to really read much on that. It's a neighbor, I call it a neighborhood, a few minutes, 18 miles south of Jerusalem as of today, and build an altar. And that's what he did. You notice he didn't question him. You notice he didn't ask why. You notice he didn't say, I'm 84 years old. And I'm assuming Sarai was about the same age. So he didn't ask that. He went and done as what God had told him to do. He didn't ask any questions. He done what he said, and he went and set his tent up at Mamre at Hebron, and he set up in his altar was a land altar. So he made an altar in the land. It wasn't with an animal or anything like that. And he done the things that God had told him to do. The lesson this morning talks a lot about avoiding conflict and doing things of that nature. And he did that because he could have easily said, Lot, have you lost your mind? All this stuff we have, I am your uncle, I am your elder. There's no way I'm doing what you're asking to do. and we're going to fight over it. And we're going, and in our nature, in our world today, that's probably what's going to happen. And as we see today, a lot of times that I see in the world of families and land and money, unfortunately, that's what happens a lot of times. But as we see, if we can learn anything from Abram, is he took the high route. He listened to God and what he told him. He thought about it, and he made a decision to let Lot have what he wanted. And what did that lead to? By trusting in God and what he had planned for him, that led into the many decades and years of offspring that he set forth in this land of Canaan in the years to come. Even though he was in his early 80s, he still had faith, where I'm sure a lot of times he could have questioned that too, because we all know Abram was blessed by God, and he understood that at this point. He knew God was going to deliver, and we all know he did. But I think the lesson this morning, that if we can gain anything from it, is to learn from Lot's